Good day, fellow viewer, and welcome back to another episode of Hammer D20, the show that's best watched on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Probably not when you're actually watching it right now, but wouldn't it be wild if you're watching it at 9:30 right now? Ooh, Twilight Zone, ooh! My name is Steven Sobot, and I will be your guide. Today, we spoke to E.K. Johnston, world-famous and critically acclaimed author. E.K. is known for her Star Wars novels, which follow the paths of Queen Amidala and Ahsoka, important side characters to the movies and narratives that always had you wondering, what happened to them outside of the films and shows? In addition to those, E.K. has been writing award-winning young adult fantasy fiction novels for the better part of this last decade. I spoke to her about why she started writing, when she started writing, what she loves about writing, and what she has planned for the future. Steven, over to you. And the first question I'm going to ask is, what got you into writing? Right.
Oh man, it's kind of weird because like a lot of people give this answer and they're like, oh, I've wanted to write stories since I was a little kid. And like, I did not. So in hindsight, though, I've always been a storyteller. When I was little, we lived out in the country and we had like a 2.5 acre lot and there was like a wood lot in the property and all that kind of stuff. And I spent a phenomenal amount of time outside doing what I now know is live action roleplay of Narnia and Star Wars frequently at the same time. So I kind of made up my own stories. And then when I went to university, I had my own computer for the first time and I started writing fan fiction. And then it was kind of a one step after that. It was something I did for fun for a really long time. And then it was something I did for work. And it was kind of a strange progression because it wasn't like my dream, but it's not a bad place to end up.
Where did you publish your fan fiction? Just, you know.
So I am old enough that I started off on GeoCities.
Okay.
And which is where I started publishing. I've been reading fanfic for longer. So it used to be like listservs. They would like email you Yahoo groups and stuff like that. But yeah, I started on GeoCities and then fanfic.net and LiveJournal. And then AO3.
Gotcha. And so like it kind of gave you practice to kind of get into more long form?
Sort of. Most of my fanfic is pretty short.
Oh, okay.
I didn't ever write like the long epics. I wrote like the little scenes, the interstitial scenes, mostly about kissing. And so when it came time to write a book, it was significantly longer than anything I'd ever done before, except my thesis.
And so you're at university, what did you study?
So I went to Wilfrid Laurier in Waterloo, and I did Near Eastern archaeology for a BA, and then I have an MSc, and it is in forensic archaeology and crime scene investigation from the University of Bradford in the UK.
Okay, perfect. And does that do you utilize like use that knowledge in your writing? Like
I do kind of all the time. The thing about archaeology is that it's 99% research. And that's very useful for a writer. And then the other 1% is communication and telling stories about people to people who don't know who they are. And in some cases don't speak English. So you learn how to write these stories and you learn how to write them scientifically, but you also there's a little bit of a creativity aspect as well. And then I got very good at writing for deadlines and very good at doing edit stuff. But archaeology gives you a very broad knowledge basis, which is also super handy as a writer.
I would assume that you went into, writing or English or communications or something like that. But that's, So I guess, piece of advice to some, if you want to get into writing, go into archaeology and utilize those.
Pretty much anything. You can do whatever you want and then become a writer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. There's no code. There's no box to guidelines to fill. You mentioned it kind of when you're mentioning LARPing in your backyard, but what would you say is your inspiration?
Usually spite. In a lot of ways, it's very often spite. I wanted more stories about female characters. And I think that's one of the reasons I kept coming back to the Chronicles of Narnia, is that Lucy and Polly and Jill, in their respective books, and even Aravis in hers, are very narratively driven. Like, they're very central characters in a way that, say, Princess Leia is not necessarily in Star Wars until you start getting into the books and stuff. Then it was also my mom read me a lot of fairy tales and mythology, and I was always like, these are deeply unfair, like just deeply unfair. And so I would rewrite those and retell those, and come up with stories that I liked better.
Sweet. Is that effectively what your kind of body of work is?
Yeah, I mean, leaving aside the IP books, every book I've ever done is a retelling of some kind. Sometimes it's kind of a thin retelling, like it's more of a this book was inspired by type of thing. But every book I've ever done is a retelling of a fairy tale or a normal story or a legend of some kind.
Right, because it was 1,000 Nights, right? That's a retelling of the Arabian Nights, right?
Yeah, the frame story of the Arabian Nights. But the story of Owen and Prairie Fire are Beowulf. Exit Pursued by a Bear is A Winter's Tale. The Afterword is every 80s fantasy I loved as a kid, and then discovered the authors were horrible people when I was in university. Jesus, yeah. And then Etherbound is Arthurian.
Your kid has mentioned, which book was your biggest critical success?
It's probably a toss-up between The Story of Owen and 1,000 Nights.
Okay.
Those were the two that were nominated for the most awards, and the most prestigious awards. But all of them have been like a something, like a best book of the year on some list, nice. Kirkus or the LA Times or something like that, which is kind of nice. Yeah. And generally speaking, they're fairly well reviewed. Right. They don't always have a lot of reviews, but when they have industry reviews, they're usually pretty good.
It's always nice to see on the book when it's his #1 bestseller kind of thing, like,
yeah,
sweet.
That is nice.
Were those two books like I guess were one of them your favorite to write?
So The Story of Owen was the first book I published, and it was the third novel I wrote. And so it's kind of like the testing one. Like, it's weird for a first book to be that well received, I think. And it's possible that if it hadn't been my first book, it wouldn't have been that well received. There was a lot of like shiny new author effect, which happens for every creative industry, right? And then 1,000 Nights was such a vastly different style. And also it was written while I was in a tremendous amount of pain. So I actually don't remember writing most of it. Oh, geez. Because it was when I entered my spine. So I don't remember a lot of it, which sounds like a really strange thing to say, because it is probably my best written book. And it's like something I'll never be able to duplicate and don't want to duplicate. But it's just so weird that I think that's why it works.
The pain gave you weird writer's inspiration.
I was like half asleep mostly.
Jeez. Well, I hope you're feeling better generally.
Thank you.
That's good. That's good.
I can sit in a chair now. That's
that's a big thing as for writing. So which one was probably one of your favorites to write?
I loved writing The Afterword. It was amazing. It's kind of the book that I feel like I had been waiting to write my whole life, even though I hadn't planned on being a writer. I wrote it super quickly. And I just loved it the whole way through. So usually you write the first draft and then you edit it for like 6 months with your editor back and forth. And usually by the time I get to copy edits, I just want to throw the whole thing in the ocean, fake my death, and like start over again in some small European country. And that never happened with The Afterword. I loved it the whole way through, like even during copy edits, and I hate copy edits. So that's probably why it was my favorite. It was just so much fun.
How long does it generally take for you to write a novel?
It really kind of depends on the novel, and it also depends on your definition of write. If you mean how long does it take me to physically sit in a chair and do it, usually about 6 days.
Okay.
if you're talking about the thought process and the note taking and the talking to myself in the car on long driving trips, that kind of stuff can last for years in some cases. I started thinking about Etherbound in 2015 and it came out in 2021. The afterword was very quick. I thought about it in December. I started writing it in February, I think. And then I had to write the Ahsoka book. So I actually wrote the first 25,000 words in like a weekend. And then I had to stop and write the Ahsoka book because it was under contract. And so it was 17 months before I came back and finished the afterword. And then it took me 4 days. So it's just kind of a work up to it. And then the actual sitting down and typing is entirely different.
Right, because I'm assuming like even if you started tomorrow on a completely new idea, like you can't just out of nowhere think of a whole new thing to then just make in just 6 days, pretty much. Like,
no, there's a little bit of thought that goes into it.
Right, yeah. Writing the Star Wars novels, you mentioned you were under contract. What's the protocol to kind of writing that? Like, are you given like plot points or lore points? Like how much freedom do you have with it?
So it changes depending on the book. And Ahsoka was both first and the most different of the ones that I've done so far, because she's much closer to the active timeline. And so with regards to Ahsoka, originally, I had submitted a pitch for, if you can believe it, a trilogy of books about Padme's handmaidens. And this was back in 2014. So it was before I think the movie had been announced, but it was after the Disney purchase, but before the movie had come out. And at the time, there was not a single YA Star Wars book. There were middle grade Star Wars books, but there was nothing in the like teenager section. And I wanted somebody at Disney to like know who I was when this happened. So I sent in the proposal at the very end of 2014, and like it was at like 9:00 in the morning. My agent emailed me, 10 minutes later to be like, I'm sending this to your Hyperion editor. And then my Hyperion editor emailed me at lunch to be like, I've sent this over to the Star Wars people. And then the Star Wars guy, Mike Siglain, called 2 days later and was like, we're putting some movies together. So we'll be in touch. And at first he said, we'll be in touch in a couple months. And in a couple months, he was like, it's going to be a little bit longer. And I was like, that's okay. And by the end of 2015, it was, I think, October. And I realized they were going to ask me to write a book about Ahsoka. And I was like, wow, I'm really glad I finished the Clone Wars over the summer. And then the movie came out in December of 2015. They all took January off to nap. And then we started working on the outline in February. And at that time, the whole outline was, we'd like you to write a book about Ahsoka getting her white lightsabers. And I was like, that's it? Like, I was expecting a lot more from Star Wars, right? Like a couple of rules. And so I wrote the outline. And we had a phone call. And at that point, Dave Filoni was on that phone call, along with Story Group and a bunch of other people. And he had said, she should go to a planet and meet somebody, like meet some new boy or whatever. And I was like literally writing down, definitely meets a girl. And so he put like the planet or the idea of the planet into the outline. But everything else was kind of like ask forgiveness rather than permission. Like I put a lot of there was some stuff into the book that we did have to cut. There was a Darth Maul scene that we cut. There was a couple of other things that we took out. And generally speaking, after the first draft, they were like, cool. Oh, also, could you write a prologue that's like, I don't know, maybe 1,000 words of the Siege of Mandalore, but don't put in any action scenes? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. Like, I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it sounds like. I'm not allowed to describe anything. They would actually prefer if I didn't. And no action, but please write me 1,000 words about the Siege of Mandalore. And I was like, well, keep this as vague as possible.
Any plans for the future? I see like on your website, you are writing a Dungeons and Dragons book. Is that what you're currently writing?
No, actually that one's done. It comes out on the 28th. It comes out on the 28th.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the movie comes out at the end of March. So the books are all coming out at the end of February.
Yeah.
So that's another IP book that I was hired to write. And again, very vague, like with like a Doric prologue, and I was like, okay. So I talked about it with the editor a little bit, Wizards of the Coast and the movie people. I'm not even sure who's involved, to be honest. Helped or just like approved the outline at various points, made some suggestions. We had to change some stuff. And also because it's a book and not the movie, like I did get to read the script. And as you've seen from the trailers, if you've seen the trailers for the movie, you will note that it is very accessible. Like it has the kind of like D&D jokes, like the gelatinous cube and like the dragon that breathes mud and like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's very accessible in terms of like somebody random who's like, oh, I like swords, and like walks into the movie to see this. And so when it came to the book, we kind of did the same thing. So it's not like the game, it's a story that takes place in the world.
Right. So where can people generally find your novels?
So my novels are available at any bookstore or library in Canada or the United States. If you're in Toronto, there are like a billion independent bookstores. There's a few in Hamilton as well. Sometimes you have to like, if they're slightly older, you might have to like go looking for them because they still have like landlines and stuff.
Yeah.
But most of them have websites because there's like a centralized website for independent bookstores now. So they can just like download the website format and just kind of put it all together, which is very nice. And always libraries is a great place for books.
Fantastic. And I guess this would be my last question. Was what would you say to an aspiring writer?
So this is kind of a two-pronged approach to aspiring writers. The first is that you have to finish your stuff and other things that start with S that I'm not supposed to say at school visits, because you can't fix it if it's not done. So you can have, 20,000 words of 8 different books and you're never going to get anywhere. But if you have 50,000 terrible words of one book and there is a beginning, a middle, and an end, then you can fix it. And that's why I always encourage kids, like, don't get so focused on the beginning that you forget that you need the whole story. Like, write the whole thing and then go from there. And the other thing is to read a lot. And when you read books, think about what you like in the storytelling and what you don't like in the storytelling, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And you can also get a lot of that out of television. When I talk about like how I learned to write, most of my writing lessons came from Star Trek. It's a super formulaic show. I write in 6 acts because I learned to write from hour-long police procedurals. Like, it's very much set up in terms of how the story is told. And it's a pretty straightforward way of learning, and it's super accessible. And there's just a lot of really, really cool stories out there right now. And they're in a lot of strange places.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we close off?
Not really.
Perfect. Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, EK. And I'm just going to throw it back to you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Before we move on to our next segment, let's take a short break. See you soon. Welcome back. So, today we're going to complete my coverage of the 2023 Oscars and the nominated films for Best Picture, as well as my own predictions for what I think is going to win each category. So without further ado, let's get going. For the Best Actor category, I'm going to go with Brendan Fraser in The Whale. It's one thing for an actor to take on a role and get into character, but another for him to transform his body in such a way. Fraser gained an impressive amount of weight for the role, supplementing the rest with prosthetics, and played this role fantastically. I'm treating this award like an MVP award. If you took this character out of the movie, what's left in it? Without Fraser, not a whole much is left. I also think the Academy will probably give Fraser this award to cement his comeback into acting after being arguably blacklisted from the industry, if only to deny the blacklisting allegations. Either way, since we saw him in so many films in the 90s and 2000s, as the above-average hunk, now turned into an obese sad man, there's going to be a bit of pity riding on that Oscar nomination. For the supporting actor, as much as I'd love to give Ke Huy Quan this award for his work in Everything Everywhere, I don't think they'll have two comeback story winners in the same Oscar. Therefore, I think they'll give it to Brendan Gleeson for his work in The Banshees of Inisherin. That film works entirely because of the dichotomy between him and Colin Farrell, as he plays such a genuinely human character. It's not the most exciting pick, and I'd argue that he probably shouldn't win, but I'm just metagaming the system right now. For Best Actress, after watching Tar, I think it's a safe bet to give Cate Blanchett this Oscar. She plays an amazing character, a truly unique character that's both the main villain while also being the main protagonist. Blanchett's role should certainly earn some kind of credit. For Supporting Actress, probably just my own bias, but I think Jamie Lee Curtis in her role of Everything Everywhere All at Once deserves this Oscar. She plays a stodgy IRS agent, a martial artist, a deranged cultist, and a lesbian hot dog finger lover. As most of the characters in this movie tend to play many roles, she's one of the most outstanding here. And without her, this film would be worse off. That, and she hasn't won an Academy Award yet, despite her successful career, so maybe this is another overarching work in the industry kind of award. For the animated film, this one's going to be a bit hard because while I think Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio deserves the credit, I think it'd be a little too much of a spit in Disney's face after they made their own Pinocchio film that's been relatively panned, receiving many Razzie Award nominations. Giving it to Guillermo del Toro may have industry implications, and I don't know if the Oscars wants to have Disney breathing down their necks. So I think the Oscar would probably go to Turning Red. Puss in Boots, another probably the second best film, has been lauded by anyone I know who's watched it, and I'd argue it's a worthwhile contender, but Turning Red was a really impactful film for that Asian Canadian, Asian American identity story that only is just getting told now. Through cinematography, making a remake of a critically acclaimed Wharf movie is cheating, but I think it's a safe bet to say that All Quiet on the Western Front will win this. It looks quite spectacular and really does recreate that World War I imagery we generally know of. The violence is on full display and the shot composition deserves some kind of credit. For costume design, I think Everything Everywhere gets it, hands down. Again, did you see the film? If not, watch it. It's got 1,000 different costumes being thrown around, all with meaning, all realistic and understandable, and all looking amazing. Joe Tupaki's costumes were probably the most notable, but that doesn't excuse everything else and what else they had on. For direction, I'm gonna go with Everything Everywhere again. Everything Everywhere is, again, my film of the year, and how the two Daniels figured out a way to get all their pieces together in the way they did is insane. It might not win because it's two different people, but if it does win, this might be a sign for studios to hire two similarly minded directors to field films in the future. For editing, I'm going again with Everything Everywhere. I'm putting this here mostly because while I think it's not going to win every category I say it is, it should win something here. How they pieced this film together was art itself, and if Elvis does win, I don't know how. How many of those shots look like a 2006 CGI scene? I mean, it's crazy. In the international film, if you don't vote All Quiet on the Western Front, I don't know what you're voting for. Next. For makeup, I think this one might go to Black Panther Wakanda Forever. What it does is that it creates interesting costumes, and while makeup isn't the same, it fits in a similar category. For music score, The Banshees of Inisherin is about a countryman composing a piece, and with that considered, interspersed throughout the film in between traditional and religious Irish music, this film's got a great combo going for it. That, and I found the Academy tends to vote these categories like music with things that have some connection to music. Original song, I actually have not heard and listened to any of these songs. You know what, screw original song. For production design, again, cheating, but again, World War I isn't a commonly thought of visual. All Quiet on the Western Front will probably get this one. Again, you needed to do better than CGI shots of the international Elvis. For sound, something I've discovered is that sound design usually goes to the movie about music or musician. It's a massive advantage those films have because, hey, there are songs. That sounds good, right? That should win awards for sound, right? So, Elvis will win this. That's a stupid reason, but you'll have to believe me on this one. For visual effects, James Cameron didn't spend $500 million only to get nominated. Avatar: The Way of Water's definitely getting this award. For writing adapted, I would think that Top Gun Maverick will get something out of this Oscar year. I think it's impressive that I was able to make an enticing and fascinating sequel based on a pretty tame, pretty normal military film, and then somehow become better. Sequels, particularly from this far away from the original, generally are either identical to the original or different in a wrong way. Top Gun makes it different in the right way, and I think it will win for this. Writing original, I think I'm going to guess Tar will win this one. I mean, I could also safely put Everything Everywhere in here, but I mean, what's the next category? Oh, it's Best Picture. Oh, right. Okay, I mean, do I need to say it? Everything Everywhere, all at once. Despite the 10 nominations, despite everything I've seen, none of them wowed me like Everything Everywhere did. A lot of them were really normal, subdued concepts or realistic movies with realistic elements. But it's a film that goes so far to be so many films and genres at once with so many stories at once, and it all works. I mean, as long as Triangle of Sadness and Elvis loses, I'm happy. I don't even know how those two films are in this category. And that about covers it. Those are my predictions, and I'm going to solidify that and keep it in a nice little box. And, you know, when this episode comes out, you can come back to my Facebook page to see what I predicted, what I said, what I didn't, etc., etc. That's about that. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you've enjoyed this so far, and I hope you enjoy the Oscars, or at least the results of the Oscars when they do come out. Have a good night, good day, good morning, good whatever, and I'll see you soon.